I'm Sarah. When I was growing up, I was what one would call strange. At least, that was what all the neighborhood kids told me. I hated going to school, and my only respite from the bullies was coming home to my loving parents. No matter what strange hobby I picked up, they were always more than supportive of anything I wanted to do. My home sanctuary didn't last long, as I was soon sharing my room with my cousin, Angela. To put it mildly, Angela was an absolute menace. To everyone else, she was an angel. Every day she would pop into my room with another insult. "Hey, loser! What lame thing are you fiddling around with now?" "Could you please get out of my room, Angela? I've already had a rough day at school." "Well, that's no surprise. You make everyone uncomfortable with your weirdness. All you do is look down at your stupid scraps of cloth. I mean, look how ugly these are." Angela snatched the piece I was working on. I reached up to take it back, and soon my parents were coming up the stairs. Angela threw herself to the ground and turned on the fake tears. "Sarah, what's gotten into you? Ever since your cousin arrived, you've been totally out of control." "I didn't want to say anything, but the other girls in school told me that she's been talking behind my back. All I've ever wanted to do was fit in, Auntie." I was grounded on Angela's account more times than I could remember. And as the years went on, it didn't get any better. By my junior year in high school, I was the black sheep of the whole town, and my cousin was one of the most popular. I had one thing that kept me going, and that was my secret application to a fashion school in New York. I knew my parents didn't have the money, but I was slowly putting together a secret portfolio of pieces I had been designing for years. I was touching up my portfolio when Angela burst into my room yet again. This time, though, she looked sad. "I need your help." This was the first time she hadn't demanded anything from me. "You know that prom is coming up, and your parents don't make nearly enough money to buy me the dress someone as popular as myself deserves. I'm going to need you to make me a custom dress from scratch. I know you've been hiding your little sketches from everyone. In fact, I've locked them in a very safe place until you get my dress done." "Wait a minute. You're holding my portfolio ransom? Angela, I need that to get into college." "Well, then I guess you better do a good job." Angela didn't even give me money for materials. I spent all the money I had been saving from my side job on prototype after prototype, and Angela was never happy. Finally, she accepted one. "It's passable. Maybe people won't laugh at it immediately, so that's good. Here's your stupid little book of sketches." By the time prom rolled around, I was so exhausted I could barely keep up with my schoolwork. My grades were slipping, but at least I knew I had fashion scholarship to look forward to. Prom night changed all of that. It shocked no one that Angela was made prom queen. She used the opportunity to announce her upcoming plans. "Thank you all for being so kind, despite my family's background. I never doubted you would pick me, given this dress I made. Which brings me to my next point. Seeing as you all love this dress, I'm going to take this opportunity to announce I will be selling my designs for a reasonable price." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Angela had really decided she was going to take over my life and my dreams. I marched up to her angrily and pushed through her gaggle of admirers. "What do you think you're doing? I spent all these hours working on your dress, and you're going to claim credit for it?" "Your little skill is better suited for me. I'm super hot, and you are so frumpy. Nobody wants to see a fashion designer who looks like you. I can't believe you would do this after all my mom and dad have done for you." I ran out of the school gym in tears and made my way home while Angela celebrated her big night. When I got to my room, I began packing my bags. I couldn't live in this house another second with my wicked cousin. My parents could see how unhappy I was, but there was nothing they could do. The only thing stopping us from being evicted was the money we were getting from Angela's parents. They realized she was a terror, and they would pay as much money as needed to have her far away from them. That entire summer, I watched her rake in money with my designs. I waited patiently that summer for my acceptance letters to start coming in. But it didn't take long for me to realize something was terribly wrong. One day late in the summer, I walked by Angela's room and saw her packing. Maybe my prayers had finally been answered and she was leaving. "You're moving out?" "Ugh, thank goodness. I can't stand living here anymore, especially since I'm making so much money off our designs." "My designs, Angela." "Well, they got me into school." My heart dropped. "Which school?" "Oh, yeah, it was that stupid fashion school you always go on about." Angela had taken everything from me. I don't know exactly what happened next, but I saw red. Before I knew it, my parents were pulling me off of Angela. "Young lady, what has gotten into you? Did you really just tackle your cousin? You have been completely erratic the last few years. She's been stealing my life for the last few years. All we wanted was for you to treat your cousin like a sister and take her under your wing. You know how difficult of a childhood she had with your aunt." Angela put on her best puppy dog eyes. "All I wanted was to fit in, and Sarah hates me. I was inspired to work on fashion like my big cousin, and I made a portfolio and got accepted into fashion school. When I told her the good news, she attacked me." "Sarah, your jealousy has gotten completely out of control. Your father and I are going to talk about what we should do about you." My parents decided that I needed to learn to have some empathy for other people, particularly my cousin Angela. They sent me on a one-way ticket to go live out of state with Angela's mother. I couldn't believe the way I was being treated. Angela had, for all intents and purposes, switched lives with me. The whole train ride down, I was nervous. Angela had nothing but terrible things to say about her mother. I'd never met my aunt before, but Angela made her out to be an absolute controlling terror. When I got off the bus, I was met by the smiling face of my Aunt Judy. "It's so good to see you, Sarah." Everything that Angela had said about her mom turned out to be a lie. Aunt Judy was one of the kindest people I had ever met. She and my uncle treated me way kinder than my mom and dad ever had. I soon came to find out that Angela had drove them almost to the point of breakdown before their therapist said Angela should be sent away. We always wanted to give Angela everything she wanted, but it was never enough. When we ran out of money to fund her influencer lifestyle, she began terrorizing us. I knew all too well how ruthless of a gaslighter Angela could be. I felt terrible for my aunt and uncle. I couldn't let a brat like Angela get away with this. I was going to get revenge for myself and my family. That night, I started sketching. When Aunt Judy saw me working, she told me to follow her to the basement. She pulled a sheet off of a vintage sewing machine. I had never seen anything so ancient before. When I was younger, I used to want to make clothes as well. Your mother was just like your cousin, and my dad always put her hobbies first. I gave up my dreams, but you shouldn't give up yours. My Aunt Judy also had a closet full of vintage fabrics, and with that, I stayed in the basement for 20 hours each day during the sweltering hot summer. By August, I had a collection of outfits that were a mix of modern, edgy, and vintage. Next, I hit the streets to put my plan in action. At the beginning of the winter, I volunteered at the local homeless shelter. I handed out all my clothes for free to those who needed them, and knowing what I had made, I waited. It didn't take long before I was approached by the local fashion blogs. My designs were seen all over town, and word of mouth was beginning to spread about the work the shelter was doing to clothe those less fortunate during the winter. That winter, almost every publication in the city wrote an article on our work. By the end of the year, we had received more than $1 million in donations to our cause. I had multiple offers from fashion houses across the country, but I already knew what I wanted to do. I called up the school I was supposed to attend, and I asked them if I could be a guest professor for the year. Given my newfound fame, they said yes without hesitation. I only had one stipulation attached to me taking this job. I wanted to conduct all the classes anonymously, through Zoom. I knew exactly how irresponsible Angela was being at the fashion school. Her Instagram was full of her partying in the city, and rumor was she was paying other students to sketch her designs for her. I could barely contain my excitement when the school year began that fall. Angela didn't even show up for my first Zoom class, and I knew I had just the excuse I needed to expose her for the fraud that she was. When she did finally show up the next week, I made sure to call her out. "Excuse me, but you must be the famous Angela. I've heard so many interesting things about you. Nice of you to show up. I know you're a new teacher around here, so you don't really understand how it works, but I usually only show up for test days if I don't have a hangover. In any case, all my work speaks for itself." "Well, excellent. Let's see exactly how quick on your feet you actually are. Would you please come to the front of the room and draw us an original sketch and design from scratch? And just so you're aware, this will be live-streamed to a host of fashion blogs all around the country. You know, for educational purposes." What followed was an embarrassment that anyone watching would never forget. Angela proceeded to draw stick figures for the next hour, while I criticized her lack of knowledge about the fashion industry. By the time I was finished, my evil cousin was in tears. Angela dropped out of school the next day. To my surprise, the entire school was happy to see her go. Turns out, Angela bullied the students and teachers here, just like she did with my family. I finished up the school year, but not before I recruited a group of the most talented students to help form my nonprofit charity to clothe the homeless in my city. I didn't stop there, though. I wanted to pay back my aunt and uncle for believing in me when my parents didn't. One afternoon, I picked my Aunt Judy off and drove her downtown to see her new boutique fashion store right in the most exclusive district in the city. My university was so impressed with my charity work that they secured me investors to open my very own shop. Now my Aunt Judy and I are working side by side, creating new pieces with an old-school twist. In fact, our first fashion show is in a few months. I got my parents' front row seats, and we even sent out an invitation to Angela. So far, we haven't heard anything back, but something tells me her jealousy is keeping her very informed of how well we're doing these days. My parents have been obsessed with me getting married ever since I was a little girl. Most parents dream of walking their daughters down the aisle, but my mom and dad had a more specific dream, and it was for me to walk down an aisle to marry a rich man, preferably one of their friends' sons. I'm Amy, and I'm my family's only hope. Dad inherited a large estate from my granddad, and Mom also came from a prominent family. Unfortunately for both of them, their family fortunes were already at a decline when they were passed down to them. It was generations of people who spent their money without thinking of consequences, without thinking of ways to grow it. They all just took and took without a care in the world. And my mom and dad were the same. By the time I was born, they were desperate to stay in the same social circles their mothers and fathers were welcomed to, desperate to stay rich. I never really saw the appeal. I'd always thought having that much money was a curse. I guess it was because I grew up watching my parents stress about money so much. When I was 4, I met Gavin. He was the heir to an oil tycoon. I didn't like Gavin's dad much. He always smelled bad and pinched me whenever I did something he didn't like. Gavin wasn't too different. He would steal my toys and he pushed me when I didn't want to play with him. Gavin and I didn't stay friends for very long. Then they introduced me to a banker's son next. I was 8 then, and Paul was way too quiet for my liking. Paul kicked my cat once, and I kicked him back. His family never visited us again. I met a bunch of boys until I was 16, when I finally had enough of all of it. And I refused to do anything my parents wanted me to. I started to rebel. I even ran away and stayed at a girlfriend's house for a few weeks. That was until my parents found out where I was hiding and told my friends' parents that they'd sue them for keeping me. I didn't want Ginny's family to get in trouble, so I trudged back home with Mom and Dad. I sulked for days, until one day I met a boy when I was on my way to school. He was sitting outside, painting, and I wasn't looking at where I was going. I bumped into him and his easel fell on the ground, his paint spilling everywhere. He was so rude. I apologized so many times, but he looked at me like I'd just slapped him. I didn't understand it at the time, but I ruined a very important thing he was trying to do. That afternoon, I saw him again. In my chemistry class, it turned out the boy was a new transfer, and he was assigned a seat next to me. We didn't like each other very much. He ignored me, and I returned the favor. But on one of our classes together, 3 girls were making fun of me because I was repulsed by frogs and I couldn't stand to touch the ones we were supposed to be studying. I started crying. The teacher blamed me for causing a ruckus, and he was about to send me to the principal's office when the new boy stood up and tried to defend me. It wasn't Amy's fault, sir. Those girls had been making fun of her all morning. Before first period, I saw them stuffing her gym shoes with rotten tomatoes. But the teacher just ignored him and kept scolding me. So the boy took his frog and threw it at the teacher's face. We both got sent to the principal's office. But it was very nice of him not to let me go alone, and we became friends. I'm Roy. Amy, nice to meet you, but you knew my name earlier. How did you? Then Roy took out a painting from his bag. It was the same one I had ruined, and I realized the painting was of me. I saw you on my first day. I thought you were the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. I blushed. Was? Yeah, you're even more beautiful than I thought. That was the very start of our story. Roy and I were inseparable, but only until it was time for me to go home. I never introduced him to my parents, because I knew they would disapprove. Roy was the absolute opposite of what they wanted. He didn't come from a family they would respect, and by that, I mean he wasn't influential or powerful or rich. He was also a rebel. He didn't care about rules or authority. He just lived his life as he wanted. He dyed his hair, wore nail polish, and had tattoos. He wore clothes that had holes, and he only wore 1 pair of shoes. He kinda looked like he was homeless all the time. Hiding him from my parents didn't last very long, though. My aunt saw us hanging out at a nearby comic book store, and as most aunts do, she told everyone. And it was a whole thing. My mom and dad sat me down at dinner, and I could tell by the disappointed looks on their faces. It was about Roy. We're just concerned about your safety. You can't be hanging around people like that, especially boys. Your mom's right. What's more is that he probably knows you have money and he wants nothing more than to get it. He's just using you. Why don't you come with us to the lake house this weekend? I hear the Boltons are gonna be there. You remember Walt, right? I hear he's just gotten into Harvard, and he's grown into quite the handsome man." Mom was right. Walt did grow into a handsome man. And he wasn't a crybaby who had snot dripping down his nose anymore, like he did when we met on my 8th birthday. I have to admit, I was easy to convince, and my parents somehow put it in my head that a life with Walt would be better than one with Roy. I always did what I was told. I wanted their approval so much that I just did what they said. I was naive. I was easily led into believing that all people wanted from me was my parents' money, or what was left of it anyway. Walt and I started going out. He even moved to our town, but when Roy saw us holding hands, I saw how it hurt him, and it hurt me too. I wanted to run after him, but Walt grabbed my hand and shoved me onto a chair. "You're not going anywhere, Princess. I'm Walt Bolton. You should feel lucky that you're going to be my wife someday." I stood up and slapped him across the face. "Nobody tells me what to do, not anymore." I ran after Roy, but he ignored me. I begged him, I cried, and just when I thought I'd ruined our friendship, he hugged me, and then he kissed me. "I couldn't stand it. I'm sorry. I know your parents don't want me for you, and I couldn't stand seeing you with that idiot. My parents can get lost for all I care. I never want to lose you." I dragged Roy down to our house and brought him in front of my mom and dad. I told them I was going to date Roy and that there wasn't anything they could do to stop me. "Is that so?" I nodded, fully thinking that I had won. My dad ordered the maids to pack my clothes, and he shoved the luggage at Roy. "Well then, since you're so sure, get out. I want you out of this house. Let's see how this beggar takes care of you from now on, and don't come back if everything doesn't work out. Your accounts are canceled, and you will have no access to your trust fund." As if there was anything left of that trust fund. Dad had used up most of it to buy his vintage cars. I knew I was going to regret it, but I went with Roy anyway. I loved him more than I cared about money or status. I fully expected him to take me to some run-down shack, but my mind was blown when we stopped at his house. My jaw dropped. There was a line of maids and a butler waiting for us, and they welcomed Roy home like he was royalty. The house looked like a palace, and there was a party. Celebrities from all over, singers and rappers and dancers I've only seen on TV. They were all there to celebrate Roy's dad's birthday. Oh yeah, I never told you. My dad owns a recording company. His dad appeared behind us, laughing. "Only the most successful label in the world. My boy can be so humble sometimes. I wish he'd brag about his dad a bit more. Hello, you must be Amy. You're all my son ever talks about lately. I'm Paul." Roy's family welcomed me with open arms. They tried to reach out to my parents, but Mom and Dad ignored them, thinking they were poor. Meanwhile, I lived a lavish lifestyle I'd never imagined I would. Not after my family's rapidly declining bank account. Roy took me to Paris and bought me jewels. We went to Italy and summered on our own private beach. And before we flew back, Roy proposed to me. I said yes. We went to my parents to break the good news, but they tried to shoo us away immediately. Until they saw the car Roy and I came out of. Roy was wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost $50,000, and I wore all my jewels and a Dior outfit. Didn't I tell you not to... Wait, how did you get that car? Oh, good. You recognized Granddad's car that you pawned. We just came here to tell you that we're getting married at the Savoy. In London? I tried to have my wedding there, and they rejected me. How did you... My fiancé has connections. I hope you'll come. I've heard you've had to sell a lot of things lately. If money's tough, Roy can buy you both tickets. Unfortunately, since you don't like him so much, we can only book you in economy." "What? How? He was poor. He looked like he was homeless." "They always say to never judge books by their covers, don't they, Dad? Oh, and by the way, we saw you were selling the house. We bought it. I expect you to move out after the wedding." My mom and Dad were speechless. I couldn't help but laugh as we left. Roy and I got married 6 months later, and we did send for my mom and Dad. Only it wasn't economy seats. Just to be petty, I booked them a special place in the plane's cargo hold. Cargo hold.